Here with Adrian Crawford. Adrian, thanks for being here with us. And I have been licking my chops waiting for this particular interview. We've had great folks that have chimed in. Every one of those videos I've enjoyed thoroughly. But I knew with you I was going to be able to go pretty broad and wide and just talk. And so almost like, let's just wind you up and then boom, let you go. So first of all, just tell us a little about who you are, your family, how'd you get here, et cetera.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate you having me. And I honestly appreciate you guys and what you're doing here and having this conversation. Again, I know that, being in this city for a while, the reality of what Wildwood actually has been in the city is actually, again, I always have such the utmost respect for churches that have been here and planning and doing the hard work of seeing people come to Jesus and seeing disciples be made and on and on. And so, and also I always say it's a credit to you guys because honestly, to lean into this conversation right now, it is one of those things to where it has to make us really uncomfortable. So the willingness for you guys to do that, because you can just go as business as usual. There's some people who are just like, they're making this to be a political thing or whatever. But you guys are willing to take this step and to lean into it. So, I applaud you guys for doing that. I came here. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I'm a coach's kid. My father was a Division I basketball coach for 30 years and played basketball Florida State. So I played my first year at the University of Tulsa. My coach got the job here at Florida State and wanted me to come. So I came here, came to Tallahassee. I met my wife here. My wife was a golden girl here. So I tell people, first thing I ever said, I wasn't a Jesus follower at the time, but first thing I ever told my wife is like, when we're getting married, you know what I'm saying? So I tell young guys, I'm like, listen, man, it's like shoot or shoot. The rim's always open. You never know. So I was fortunate enough to land a golden girl. I came to faith. I came to faith while I was here. Honestly, I was 19. First time I ever heard the gospel preached at 19. I mean, I grew up as a African American, about Jesus. But I couldn't tell you, I knew Jesus died on the cross. I couldn't tell you why he had to die on the cross. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I knew the story of Adam and Eve. I knew they ate. I always thought it was an apple. They ate an apple. Something went wrong. I had no idea what went wrong. I knew about Christianity, the cross. So for me, I love business. So the cross to me was it's like the Nike check or like the Starbucks goddess is the brand of Christianity. But man, I heard somebody preach the Bible and I was 19 and they were just preaching about this man named Jesus who came and died in the reality that that I had sinned. And there's nothing you could have told me that I wasn't a good person. I wasn't going to heaven, right? But started realizing that I started on my own journey, reading this and realizing, this is in the Bible. It's one of those moments where you're like, this is in the Bible? This is in the Bible. First time I ever heard about not having sex before marriage. I'm like, this is in the Bible? I'm like, there's no way. This can't be in the Bible, right? And so all this stuff. And then probably for my first time hearing the gospel, about 9 months later, I got radically transformed. It was in a moment to where I was at a conference and when I say not an audible voice, but the thing within, I literally heard the Spirit of God speak to me, say, choose a day who you're going to serve. Now, I'd never read the book of Joshua in my life. And I knew in that moment. So, the whole altar call thing, I had been in enough of those kind of services up at that year, they were going to do that thing. So it was 10 minutes into when I heard that. And so as soon as the guy, said it, it was actually Dr. Rice Brooks, who's the writer of the book God's Not Dead. He's actually a friend of mine, and he said it. I didn't even let it get out of his mouth. He started bow your heads, and I'll never forget. I started walking straight down there. He didn't even invite me down. I just went down there, and in that moment, man, there was so I radically came to Jesus, and then I went to go play. I played here. Went to go play professionally in Spain. Me and my family moved back here. Me and my wife moved back here. And man, we really just, we came back to Tallahassee. And the reason why I was in Spain and really felt, when I was playing that God was speaking to me a lot. I would go to practice, come home. I literally read my Bible, read my Bible for 3 hours. It was some of the most incredible times. It would literally be like God would sit next to me as I was learning the Bible. And I felt God telling me, and he gave me my life verse during that time. It was Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and everything will be added unto you. And I felt God says, if you take care of my business, I'll always take care of you. And I started living. I was like, well, where can I go to build God's kingdom? And so a bunch of my friends who were all athletes, we all got saved at the same time. And so we all just let's move back to Tallahassee. So we all came back to Tallahassee, was here, did athletic ministry on campus, as well as started my first business. I did basketball skill training, and And so we just built that up and kept doing that. And then I decided to, right around 2011, that when I felt like God would lead me to plant a church. I kind of got that call in 2004, but about 7 years later, and then around 2013, we planted a church called Engage. So at that current time, my wife was running a dance studio, I was running a basketball business, and we had nothing else better to do with 3 children. It was like, hey, let's go ahead and start a church, right? Again, I started a few different businesses. I tell people, I would start 8 of them before I started another church again, right? But short, man, we did that, and I always felt called to be bivocational. And so the reality, what that means is just like, I pastor and lead a church, but also, work, run business, stuff like that. And over the course of the last 7 years, we grew a church of 18 of us in a living room to well over 1,000 some odd people. And man, we are split ethically straight down the middle. We are 45% black, 45% white, 10% other ethnicities. And I tell people all the time in our church, Black lives, blue lives. Kneel, stand, love Colin Kaepernick, hate Colin Kaepernick, love President Trump, hate President Trump, feel the burn, make America great. They're all there. And so most people are like, well, what's it like pastoring a multi-ethnic church? I'm like, most of my time is just making sure we don't kill each other and just continue to push forward. So that's pretty much my job. But no, I love it. And man, yeah, and this is kind of where we're at. And it's an incredible, it's been an incredible ride, and I'm incredibly grateful. I love the city that I live in. I never thought that God would have me be here, because again, building a multi-ethnic church, normally that happens in, like in cities, Miami and Atlanta, Los Angeles, places like that. But, I just feel like God just says, I want to do something that when people, look at it, it'll be like, man, surely God's with those people. And that was kind of the verse that God gave us when we started our church, that we said, we don't want to go anywhere unless you go with us, because we want people to know that it's so profound that they would say, surely God is with those people. And so that's kind of what we do. And I've got 3 incredible children. I've got a son, Jalen, who's 15, Brooklyn's 12, and Peyton is 9. And so, and my wife runs a dance studio, has 2 locations. So yeah, we have a lot that's going on, but actually what I love about it is that we're actually on mission. And I wake up every day. I love what I get to do. So one of our values at Engage is diversity. And in every one of our values, we have kind of an axiom. And our axiom for diversity is called make room. The reason why I think, outside of the stuff of just the grace of God, I think part of just the call of my life is the reality that we make room. My job is not to try to get someone to all of a sudden start to behave a certain way. It's actually to give them room. So in our church, we have people who they may come in, and again, it's somebody myself who grew up listening to hip hop, they may not. And so they like to, I tell people I don't like to go hunting because the few times I went hunting, it was too early and I fell asleep. So I can do that at my own house, right? I can just open the windows and feel like I'm outside, instead of being in a tree stand, But I got people who are in our church who do that, and they love it. They love it. And for me, I'm like, I don't want them to conform hey, you have to listen to hip hop now because you're now a part of Engage, or you have to do this. No, I want you to be who you are because how God's made you to be, and we want to give you room. And so what we try to do is give people room. And so I've got people who are in our church who, out of their own mouth, are like, prior to coming to here, that they got invited by a friend. They show up, it's this black guy on stage, and then all of a sudden they felt some type of way because of, honestly, their perceptions and views. But they stayed around and they realized, man, that gave them room. I wasn't trying to change them. They wanted to sit down and have a conversation with me. I sat down with people who literally have looked across the table from me and have said, man, the reason why African Americans are more in this place of poverty is because of the bell curve, right? Because of intellect. And I've had people literally look across, and sometimes I look at people, I'm like, you do realize I'm 6'6", I'm a pretty big guy, and they just but what happens though is that I push and I give real truth, but at the end of the day, I don't balk at that stuff, because at the end, I always realize this is what, is what Rick Warren once said. It's like, my enemies will never come to Jesus, only my friends. So what I do is I lean in, I give people room, and I push back where I think some of the things they're saying is false. But at the end of the day, I try to get to know people, and we make room. And so we give people room, and that's it. And then the last thing I'll say, we major on the majors. I tell people all the time, at the end of the day, the major here is Jesus. That's the major. Now, I hold the gospel incredibly tight. I hold that reality of, man, the reality of creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Like I hold the teachings of Jesus very tight. I mean, Orthodox Christian, I hold it very tight. Forms, patterns, strategies, all it's very loose. So at the end of the day, us give people room, but we major on the major. So I tell people, if you walk away from our church based off of somebody else's political ideology who may sit next to you, then that's ultimately your God, not Jesus. So if we break rank because of a political ideology, then that's what you worship. And so we major on the majors. And another part of my anointing, I think, of my life is this, is that one of our friends that we know, Leon's Crump, says it best of me. He's like, I just have, and I say it this way, I have a very interesting way. I can say real difficult things, really harsh and difficult things, and white people actually listen to it. And so it's just I guess a grace, and do it because they know at the end of the day it comes from a genuine place in my heart. And even to African Americans, it comes from a genuine place in my heart. So I think that's why. But we just give people room, and we let the Spirit of God do what only the Spirit of God can do.
So here's what I love. So you're not saying we want everyone in the room to now all of a sudden bow down and embrace this person's culture.
Yeah.
What you're saying is, no, we want everybody, be yourself, but we want everyone to buy into our culture. Mm-hmm. And our culture is, you just gave one of the examples.
Yep.
Leave room.
Leave room. Our culture, and so what I tell people is that one of the biggest things I think is a knock on this idea of diversity, or not an issue with diversity today. And I would say this as somebody who's Black, who comes into, who is coming to a more predominantly white church, who's trying to build ethnic diversity, is that many times people of color feel like they have to leave their experiences and their color and their culture outside. So people want their skin color. They don't want their culture that comes with it. And so what we say is, no, listen, we want those things. Now, when I say our culture, it is the fact of, man, we have our values, what makes us who we are. So that is part of our culture. But as far as ethically, so like I said, if you come into our church and, man, you want to wear board shorts and, and sandals, great. If you come from if you grew up and you didn't really go to church that much, but the church, they wore suits, man, awesome. Come in there. Like I said, I stand up and I'm like, listen, I preach normally in jeans, t-shirts, and I love tennis shoes. And so I usually have some type of retro pair of tennis shoes. That's just how I am. What we tell people, the authenticity is self-awareness and resilience to remain that. So it's knowing who you've been designed and created to be, skills, gifts, whatever, but also resilience to remain that way. We want to create an authentic culture. And I think that's what we do, is create that, because I don't want you, that's the problem today. We're trying to get everyone to morph into, hey, assimilate to everything about who I am, or assimilate to everything about that, instead of actually giving people room to be willing to do that. Again, our main demographics, 18 to 35 year olds. Okay. So the type of worship mainly, you whether if it's no matter what, elevation to, let's use elevation worship for one, or Hillsong or something like that. Well, what we can do is that for those, I tell people, so I had to tell our worship team one time, because though we had a multi-ethnic group of people leading worship, but for people who come in who are African-American, they're coming more from a gospel kind of thing. So they have to take a big step when they walk into our world. They have to take a big step. And I told our worship team, we're going to take a big step to them. So for us, we do, because at the end of the day, I love gospel music. And so at the end of the day, man, you'll walk into our church and, man, you'll hear one of those songs that may come from Hillsong, whatever. And then we may have a song that comes from an African-American gospel artist and that's the mix of who we are. But what we had to do is be intentional to lean over, because many times we don't want to do that. We want everybody to walk to us and us not have to change, but people have to really take a big step. And so that's a very practical way that we were able, that we actually try to do it.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
And that's, again, I don't want to go down this road yet, but I do want to get there eventually. But that is where right now, when I look at a divide that seems to get wider and wider in America, I'll make the argument, I don't think that divide is actually about race. I don't think it's actually about pigment in there. That it certainly is happening, but I think it's actually about ideology and where one's coming from. And it seems to me that the majority of America is in the middle, and you've got the extremes. But what's happening is that gap is getting wider, because we're not saying, if I'm going to be the first one to take a step to you.
That's it. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. But think about this. And I would agree with you that I think there's always, I always tell people, there's always the basement, right? The motives of everything. But what we have to realize is that the idea of race, right? When it comes to that, now again, if you're going to say race, ethnicity, whatever, depending on, because, I tell people they will, race is a construct made up by us. And, but most of the time when we say race, we maybe it means to be ethnicity, but we're talking about people's skin color. Well, here's the deal. Because of how it was ultimately founded, and we have to face that reality. It was not founded in a great manner. That does not mean that I don't love our nation or people don't love our nation. It's just the fact that we have to face with the reality of what happened. But the reality is that those who are white, there has been a place in culture and society. And so this will get to your thing of how we reach across, to where there has been places of power and whatever. Now, again, I may say the word privilege, people may get triggered or whatever, but I would tell you, just embrace hear me what I'm saying is that when there's been this little bit farther ahead, the person, just like, say for me in an organization I lead, I've got power that's there. So my job as the one who has power is to actually go give it away.
Yeah. And
so I have to take that step. And so what I try to encourage my friends who are white is saying, hey, well, you say, well, I didn't own slaves, I didn't do this, da, da, da. I'm like, well, here's the thing. If there is power, if there is leverage and things you have, man, your job is to go give that away. Take that first step. Again, I can encourage my African-American brothers, hey, man, you don't feel like, I don't owe, man, we've dealt with enough here. Why do I have to go take that step? Well, if you're Jesus followers, because the Bible commands us to. And just like if you're white, why do I have to take that step? I didn't do this because the Bible commands you to. Because why? Jesus did that for us. Because I always just have to remind people, we may say, hey, people, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But if you actually believe the gospel said that we were these people who had no bootstraps spiritually, and Jesus steps down, God in the flesh, having all power and authority, but laid aside his rights as God, and he dies a death that we should have died, and he pulls us up, and he now imputes to us righteousness. So when we tell other people, pull yourself up by your bootstrap, again, I'm all about personal responsibility, but please understand the fact that, man, someone pulled us up.
Yeah.
And so we now have a responsibility to do the same thing, because that is the heart of the gospel. The heart of the gospel is to take what we have and to actually give it away. And see, that's the issue. I think when you talk about 4 levels deep, it's political ideology. I think it's power. I think it all comes back to power. And I think that we see power in Genesis 1 and we see Genesis 3. What happens? Sin enters the world. Human beings still go take the power and they create and make, but we get to Genesis 11, they make it all for themselves. It's to the height of human ingenuity in that moment. And the truth is that human beings are called to give power. So I tell people, if you have power, you are responsible to Jesus' power to leverage and give power away. Think about this. I mean, Jesus came down. I mean, he's God in the flesh. He could have just stepped down as a man, but he could do whatever he wanted to in a moment. All right, I'm about to end this. Let's go ahead and get it done. But no, he spent 30 years, this was 3 years, training and leveraging all he had to give to these 12 who would go out and change the world. And honestly, I have hope when I read the Gospels, because I'm like, man, them dudes were morons like me, right? You know what I'm saying? Every time I read Peter, I'm like, yeah, Peter, I identify. I'm like, yes. Like there's moments where I'm like, I'm with Peter. I would have been walking on water. Then I would have probably been the ones, you know what I'm saying, rebuking Jesus, getting called Satan, like the whole deal. But I read it. But again, you watch Jesus, like the people, like these young boys who they were like hard-headed and all this stuff, but he invested, he gave away. So how much more should we? What did he gain? I mean, I tell people, Jesus came in the world with nothing as a baby, nothing. He died on a cross, stripped naked, left with nothing, even to the point where his actual spirit, he gives it up simply for this, so that we could have everything.
Yeah.
And so the audacity that we would ever have as Jesus followers to not leverage every bit of power we have for those who don't have it is not living according to the gospel.
Yeah, to say, I want to keep power.
Yes.
Again, in whatever context that is, it's actually antithetical to the gospel.
Absolutely.
Let's stay on that for a second. So when I think about America, and I'm right now I'm focusing on the American church in here, because this is the place where you and I have the most amount of influence.
Yes.
And I don't mean because we're pastors. I mean,
Yes.
this is, we believe that God has called the church to be salt and light.
Yep.
Prevent the lower the speed rather, or
Yep.
rate of decay that's going to take place in the culture, but then also be that which points to truth. That there's a better way, there's freedom, etc. So the church would be a city on a hill,
Yeah.
a beacon. When you think about the church in America,
Yep.
and we think about this idea of power, if you were to say to me, to Wildwood, to churches in general, what does it look like from your perspective? How could Wildwood help in this of churches looking more like America looks like?
Yeah.
And by the way, you and I have talked about this. It doesn't mean that every single church needs to have 13% black.
Yeah.
And we don't mean that,
Yep.
but we do mean that it reflects what Paul talks about.
Yeah.
This new humanity. So,
Yeah. What I would say is that I would say, I'll talk about in general with this, and then I'll get specifically with Wildwood. I have friends of mine. I have one of my best friends pastors in Corvallis, Oregon. Okay. So if you've ever been to, Corvallis, Oregon State, great place. Now, when you go to Corvallis, there's not a lot of black people in Corvallis, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? And again, my friend, pastors in Corvallis, I always joke. I'm like, dude, every black person in this city goes to your church, like everyone, right? You know what I mean? There's like 50, and they're all here. But my point is, like, he reached his heart. He has a heart so much, but for that. But when it's all said and done, his church is going to be 98% white because that's the culture around him. But what he does is he does such a job of leveraging that in order to pour into places in Portland and other places that are reaching across the ethnic lines. I think what you have to realize is, I think so many times we get caught up to, hey, we have to have a diverse church, meaning that we have to have all these different races that sit next to each other in church, right? I'm like, well, first of all, it has to go deeper than that, because I'm like, we do that at Starbucks, okay? So like, we're the church, so like, we shouldn't get up. I have to tell people, I shouldn't get an applause because of our church looks like a Starbucks when you walk into it, right? I'm like, I shouldn't get like a hand clap for that. But what I would go down to is the fact of, like, when someone like here at Wildwood, is because there's a reality of affluence and like kind of affluence and influence, right? There's resources financially, and there's the idea of influence, whether if that influence be in the business space, that's in the political space, and in education, government, wherever they find themselves. And that actually how you do it is actually taking your power, whether it's financially, if it's the idea of influence, and also knowledge, and taking that and actually investing that to those who may not have that. So many times what we do is we think the first level is this. We just think of money, right? We'll say, okay, well, hey, let's just start giving money over here. Well, yeah, that anybody giving away money, that hurts at some level, but that's not relational. But now all of a sudden you're like, oh, hey, maybe I got influence here, and somebody's well equipped, and maybe for this or for that, man, maybe let me put them into my organization, let me help them, let me leverage this, whatever. Somebody who doesn't look like me. But the bigger thing is, man, giving like the knowledge away. I tell people all the time, listen, I'm a big believer in this, man. How I started businesses and sold one and keep creating is because I had someone who did not look like me. I didn't grow up in anybody in my family who ran business, but someone who did not live, who was not even a Jesus follower, looked at me, saw what I was doing, and said, hey, I want to help you. And you know what they did? Their knowledge, their influence, they gave it away to me. And you know what it allowed me to do? It allowed me to move forward, to then begin to create levels of generational wealth that's going to pass to my kids, because someone was willing to take their knowledge and they spent time with me. And so I tell people, it's not just about just give money, because everybody starts, well, what do I do? What do I do? Right? In this conversation race, what do I do? Like, I don't know what to do. What do I do? I'm like, oh, it goes back to Moses. What's in your hands? What has God given you? Go give it away. Go give it away. Go begin to leverage that to help people. Listen, we have a huge wealth gap in Tallahassee. And I'm not saying, hey, your job now is go and give all this money to fix the wealth gap. No, we can't do that. But what you can do, if you're a business owner, if you're a leader, man, start using to go, hey, I'm going to go not only invest in trying to help raise up minority entrepreneurs, but also I'm not going to just give money. I'm actually going to help make sure they're successful. See, now that begins to change the game. Because what I'm trying to say is, listen, like, it's fine. Listen, we have to give our brother a coat, if they're cold.
Sure.
But man, I hear a lot of people say a lot of times, hey, when they talk about the political ideologies, and I'll kind of make this short, political ideologies, one group will say, hey, man, you gotta feed somebody. If they're hungry, give them a coat. The other group say, hey, man, listen, you gotta teach them how to fish. What I realize is that both parties really don't do that well. Like, they're both part of the gospel. Yeah, you should take care of them, and you should actually help them learn how to fish. But my whole thing is like, man, are you out there? Are you actually helping someone learn how to fish? Are you leveraging what you have? Because people need it. They absolutely need it. And if you can do that, you'll really start to see change and you'll start to see impact. But here's what everybody has to understand. This is a long-term thing. If you are just trying to ease your conscience, then you just write a check to somebody. If you actually want to see like gospel change, you gotta go give your life.
So this thought is powerful.
Yep.
All right. And again, when we're looking at justice, we're saying justice, if I understand the scriptures correct, and I know you have the same view, it is not enough, biblically speaking, to be against injustice.
Yeah.
That is a part of the equation.
Yes.
That is a foundational piece. So yes, we have to be against injustice.
Yes.
But what Jesus makes clear, what Isaiah makes clear, what all the prophets make clear is we have to seek justice.
Yes.
We have to go after giving people what it is that they deserve. And what they deserve is an equal opportunity.
Yes. My point is this. Nehemiah was more than this. He saw injustice, but there was action. Because here's what I believe. I believe many people have not fully, we talk a lot about the gospel. I think many times we don't live out the fullness of the gospel. We live out the death of Jesus. He died in our place for our sins. And it is only through his finished work that we are now saved by his free gift of salvation. But the reality is 3 days later, he came back to life. And the Bible, Paul writes, the same spirit that raised Christ from the dead now lives in us. We are now called to be presence carriers. And so when being a presence carrier simply means this, it means that we are now called to live out this resurrection. So what does that mean? Our gospel has to have social implications. If your gospel does not have social implications, then you have half of it. You don't fully have it. And many people, we hide underneath theology and all these things, not to actually have action in the world. And that's what society is seeing in this idea of race.
Talk to me. How can I, as a 49-year-old white male, speak to issues of injustice that are positive, productive, helpful, et cetera? Does the question even make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I think the first thing is this. I think the first thing is about, one, I think it's doing what you've been doing, is educating yourself, right? I think that's the first thing, because I think when you can begin to educate yourself, and not just having knowledge, you can spit back stats and whatever, but actually educating yourself, and not just in reading books, but actually spending time with people who don't look like you, because you want to educate, because many times when you get to learn about something, then you can actually begin to get inside of to feel the pain of it. See, most people don't listen, this is one of the biggest conversations of why we cannot move forward with the issue of race in our country, is because we are very emotionally immature as people. We don't like to feel pain. We don't like to feel pain. We don't like to feel bad about ourselves, right? At all. And it doesn't matter how old you are or whatever. We don't like to feel bad about ourselves or feel bad about a situation. But when you start talking to someone and dealing with the reality of really kind of the walking of, let's say, of Black people within this country, to feel the pain, to lean in and to learn, to educate. I mean, I tell people all the time, again, people look at me and they're like, well, this is what I tell people. They look at me all the time, like, look at you. You made it. You did this. I tell people, I was one of the top 50 players in the country out of 700,000. I'm in the top 1% of what I do. I by the grace, got pastor of church now in the top 5 or 10% of church, whatever those stats are in America. Like, everybody, you can't point to me. I'm not to know, because there's so many of my friends who did make it. And again, yeah, we could say, well, they didn't work hard, they didn't do this, but man, regardless, the circumstance behind. So I tell people, feel their pain, feel the pain of man. And again, my experience growing up, and I mean, it's the 1990s, my parents were moving, and they come into our house to sell it, and realtor, she's a super nice lady, white lady, says, hey, if you want to sell this house fast, you got to take down all your pictures. She's like, I hate to say that to you, but if somebody walks in here, a lot of people are not going to be okay with the fact that somebody black owning a home like this. Okay, parents. And this is normal for my parents. As a black man, having to always make myself feel like I'm very emotional, right? And so I have a big personality, and so sometimes I have to calm that down, because why? I want to make people not to feel threatened by who I am. The fact of the matter is, in our own city we live in, going to look at real estate, I never go look at like real estate. If I'm going to look at commercial real estate with someone who looks like me, why? Because I've had it happen a few different times where people 100% dismiss us, won't get called back, nothing like that. It's okay. That's very small in the reality of this. And I'm a well-adjusted black man. But man, there are people with a lot of pain and a lot worse stories than my story. And I tell people, you need to know their story. You need to lean into their story, because when you get the knowledge, going to what you said, when you get the knowledge of their story, you can begin to feel. It has to go, as John Tyson said, from sympathy to be able to have empathy, but also then you got to begin to have agony. Do you ever agonize over a people? Does your heart break with the realities of what we see so many times today? Does your heart break that the fact that you watch a George Floyd, 8 minutes and 40 seconds, lose his life? See, what I want people to understand sometimes, and why, and again, and this is kind of, and I'll get really back to like very practically of how you get involved, is that so many times for African Americans in this country, we feel we have to lose our minds in order to actually get people to pay attention. We have to scream and yell, and we have to riot and protest and do all that. Why? To just pay attention. Because what you saw with George Floyd has been happening for black people for a long time. We just now have cameras to show it. We just have cameras to show it. I could do this right now. I could hand you my phone right now. And if I hand you my phone right now, and I'll let you say, hey, pick 10 people on my phone. And you could ask me, are these 10 people were African American men, whoever, in my phone? I promise you, if you called every last one of them, they would have a story of policing and not in a healthy way, harassment, every last one. I tell people, we didn't have a secret black people meeting that no one knew about to say, hey, let's make this, hey, we're gonna let everybody know, man, that police all treat us this way. No, it wasn't a meeting. Like, you know what I'm saying? There was no email, there was no direct message sent for this. There's no evite to this meeting. No, it's just part of the experience. But here's what I would tell people to feel that. And let me tell you this, and me saying that, listen, does not mean I am anti-police. I actually believe that police officers, majority of them are good men, good women, who just want to get home to their families and do all those things. But we also have to say, too, that there are some things that are there, that there are problems that are there that need to be addressed. So my point is that when you can begin to feel someone's pain, it should make you feel some way. If you watch Ahmaud Arbery be shot, or the horrific things I saw come out after George Floyd, where people began to read off his criminal record. And I know why they were doing it. Well, hey, we've turned him into a martyr. Somebody died. Can we just mourn the fact that a man died? And what does it matter what his criminal record was or why he died? See, we don't feel pain anymore. We've lost the ability to lament. We don't do it. And so when you don't do that, in the way you begin to lament, you educate yourself, because you can begin to feel the pain. Now, from there, you ask, well, what do I do? Then I tell people, man, then you begin to do the work, but are you willing to do the work in private? See, that's the issue. See, why we're seeing a lot of fumbles from like white evangelical leaders publicly right now in this issue is because they've never had to not lead from the front. They've never had to leave from the front, and they don't know what to do. I got to do something. What do I do? And it's like, no. You're not the one to be seen right now. And that's so hard, because what it's exposing idolatry. And nobody wants to talk about that. It's exposing idolatry. Are you willing to do the work when no one's around? Are you willing to, again, what's in your hands? Are you willing to go do the work and no one will ever see you do the work? And you know what you're going to have to deal with when people ask you? Well, they don't see it on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. Well, are you really doing anything? Yeah, I am. Here's what I've been doing.
When it comes to someone who is going to say, I'll just say this explicitly as I can, if you're not going to pursue the the extreme right version of justice, and if you're not going to pursue the extreme left version of justice, if you're going to pursue the biblical pursuit of justice, you are going to be criticized. But speak to any person, that's saying, I want to pursue this, and here's what I need to know.
I think that it's a real thing. And I think, first of all, it's what Jesus says. It's count the cost. It's going to be very painful. Anytime you're trying to lead in a new way, it's always painful. We have this thing in Engage we feel one of the things God's called us to do is to launch innovative reconcilers into the world, right? And that's people who are connected to God, one another, and their meaningful work in the earth. Well, even that word, to be an innovative reconciler, literally in the words is pain. To innovate is painful. To reconcile is painful. And so I tell people, to be a minister of reconciliation, what you're signing up for is pain. It's like the old, it's Rocky 3, right? It's Clubber Lang. What are you going to do? Pain. Pain. Like, it's all you kept saying. And I literally feel like that's the walk of Jesus. Like, whatever, pain. That's all I've come to that. And I think why is this so important in this current hour of walking in this and balancing that tension and really leaning in is because I believe you begin to be more like Jesus, and it's going to be painful. We live in a world to where we don't want pain. We want it to be easy. We want everything to be easy. That does not mean that, again, I want to be careful, because sometimes people can go way overboard with that and just be like, man, like anything that's ever a blessing or a good thing that you do is like, well, that's from the devil. You're like, no, like, again, I read in Deuteronomy, there's blessings, there's good things. I read Hebrews 11. The first half of it, people did some really great things in society's eyes. The last half of Hebrews 11 are people who no one knew about, who died for their faith. And this is the world wasn't worthy of them because they did their job. And I think, but we have to realize this, it's going to be incredibly painful. So one, our communion with God and communing with him daily is incredibly important, incredibly important. And what I mean by communing with God is this: reading the scripture, prayer, all the spiritual disciplines. But I tell people, how do you connect with God? That's one of the most important things. It's like, how do you connect with God? I think the other thing is that as you begin to spend time with God, you begin to pray. It's also doing it how you begin to walk through this. You've got to do it with community and family. We were never meant to walk alone. We were never built that way. We were built to walk with people. And that's why you have to walk side by side. Because when you fall, or man, you want to start drifting, whichever way you want to drift, you got a friend say, and they pull you back in, right? I've got friends like that with me right now. There's times right now I can get really, really going, really angry. And my friends, they love me. They've been around me for a long time. They'll pull me in. Nope. Come back in here. This is where we're going. And that's incredibly, and I do the same for them. It's incredibly important. So I think, communing with God, having your friendships and your relationships, and I also think is also understanding there's a bigger mission that's at hand, thinking beyond yourself. Please, we have a mantra we say at Engage. Your calling in life has everything to do with you and nothing to do with you. Has everything to do with you because it's the one God gave you. Has nothing to do with you because any God-given calling is always about human flourishing. It's always about human flourishing. And most people, at their best, they just only think about themselves. So when it's painful and you don't think about a bigger picture, that's why athletics is such a picture of diversity. Why? Because there's a greater mission at hand. That's why you can have somebody from Carroll City and Opelika, and you can have somebody from Brunswick, Georgia, be on the same team, and man, they don't look at each other. When you're in the midst of it, you're not looking at each other like, well, hey, man, I know your dad voted for President Trump, and man, hey, I know, hey, your mom probably voted for the lady, for the mayor of Atlanta, so man, we can't get along, so let's go ahead and let the quarterback get sacked. You're like, no, you're like, sorry, chief, like no, like we're out there, we're out there together because it's a mission, and this is what I'll tell you, that is the issue in the church, and why the church right now, it's only between 6 to 10% of our church are ethnically diverse, and here's why: is because we have been so incredibly comfortable. The issue, I think, is at hand in God's church right now. He is shaking Babylon out of his church. We have lived in such comfort And the reason why we have no voice to speak into race, because you cannot export what you do not have. And so we're comfortable. And so what ends up happening when you're just comfortable is that, man, it doesn't stretch you. It doesn't pull you out of doing this. And I think what God is trying to do, even this moment, if his church would wake up, is that, hey, we have a mission that's at hand. And so now all of a sudden, whether if it's Engaged Church or Wildwood, man, if it's Bethel downtown, or man, it's Four Oaks or whoever, listen, we're on the same team. We have different parts of the wall, but we're on the same team, and we're going after something. And when you do that, you don't care. Then theology is this: do we major on the majors? Do you believe in Jesus? Yes. Do you believe he's the Son of God? Yes. Do you believe he lived a sinless life? Yes. Do you believe he resurrected? Yes. Do you believe that's the only way we get in heaven? Yes. Cool. All right, we major on the majors, right? Then let's go see people won to him and see humans flourish. If you can do that and you can push through that, that's what it is. But there's got to be a bigger mission. Everything and nothing has everything to do with you, nothing to do with you.
And if you have that mindset,
Yeah.
then you really can say, Lord, whatever you choose to do with me.
That's it.
And if you choose to give me a large platform to influence, great. If you choose to give me a very small platform, then great. But it really is about what you want. And
I want to say this, because you said something great as we close, is that you talked about the idea. I think what people have to really dig into is to make sure that we have lived in a world where our gospel and our political ideology are like Play-Doh. We've mushed them together, and now when actual people are starting to pull those apart, you actually feel like someone's pulling the gospel apart. When just maybe your political ideology has been meshed in there. And that's what people are feeling right now. They feel this thing being pulled apart. Because right now, I mean, even something as simple as we talk about like the Confederate statues and all that, and people are losing their minds, man. Now, I'm not saying you just be rambunctious and just everybody's do whatever you want. But I tell people all the time, I'm like, we got statues and buildings named after Confederate, and we'll say it's culture, whatever. But at the end of the day, I always joke, it's a funny joke. I say, like, some of those things need to come down. Because let me tell you this, it's always a group who talks about like participation trophies. Like, they're the ones fighting for the participation trophies in the South. The Confederate lost, I'm sorry. Like, the South is filled with participation trophies. Like, you don't get a thing. So, sorry, you may have to cut that. People may not like that. So, anyway.
it's called herd. It's called herd. Brother, can't thank you enough.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll do round 2 of this, and that please know that I'm sincere when I say this. We pray regularly for Engage.
Oh, thank you.
And I do. I believe Tallahassee is going to be better off.
Yeah.
The more you guys grow, both functionally and numerically. So the Lord's using you. So thanks for being faithful here, man.
Oh, I appreciate you. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Look forward to doing this again then.
Yes, sir.